The neighborhood smelled like fresh mowed grass and quiet desperation. Margaret Harlan, everyone called her Karen behind her back, slid the violation packet across the community center table like it was a parking ticket for breathing too loud. Your HOA board position is being eliminated effective immediately, she said without even glancing up from her tablet, voice syrupy, sweet the way only a suburban tyrant can manage. The enforcement officer will escort you out once you've signed the separation agreement. Bless your heart. 12 years of my life in Serenity Pines, the place I helped plat from empty lots and a folding table in my garage back when the covenants were just a dream nobody thought would bite. Like my name on the original deed could be erased with one click and a wave to the rent-a-cop in the hallway. The room smelled like lemon pledge and pure cowardice. I didn't say a word, just nodded, picked up the pen, and signed. Not because I agreed, but because I was chambering the first round. Hey, if you're still here 5 sentences in, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. It genuinely helps more than you know, and most people never do. Thanks for being the exception. The truth was Margaret didn't even know whose name was really on the master covenant. I wasn't some retiree dragging out tenure for one last bake sale credit. I was the woman who built the spine of this entire homeowners association from scratch, back when compliance was just a checkbox they hoped the county wouldn't notice. They gave me early voting proxies as a favor when the community was half built. I turned them into the architecture of every rule that kept Serenity Pines running without lawsuits or bankruptcies. I was the reason the HOA got the county approval, the landscaping grants, the 3 quiet buyouts of foreclosed lots that let Margaret even have a president's gavel to bang. And because I never made noise, because I let the loud ones take the mic at the annual meetings while I redlined the CC and RS in the back room, they forgot or chose to forget. I never fought for the spotlight, so they mistook me for a part of the scenery. What Margaret didn't realize, what she couldn't realize, was that I never sold, never diluted, never cashed out those extra lots and proxies. I held every single Class B voting interest I'd converted in 2012 quietly, legally, airtight through amendments, mergers, and all 5 presidents before her. When they needed cash for the pool, I floated the note. When they needed quiet during audits, I signed the NDAs before they even hit send. I wasn't just the majority. I was the architect of their silence. But power that isn't used starts to look invisible. That's what Margaret counted on. Her first month, she replaced the old welcome signs with glossy Modern Harmony banners, called it innovation, reassigned 3 original volunteers to roles titled redundancy liaisons. Then she started trimming the org chart. Anything that didn't fit her pastel aesthetic got boxed and badge disabled. I saw my name on the first cut memo as Legacy Compliance Coordinator. Non-revenue. Non-revenue. That was rich. I'd personally authored the covenant protocols that kept us from 6-figure county fines in Q3. I trained half the new board members, sometimes off the clock, because Margaret's streamlined onboarding skipped entire regulation modules. And now I was dead weight, something to be trimmed for the quarterly burn chart. But Margaret wasn't dumb. She was reckless. Big difference. She assumed silence meant absence. That being legacy meant I was too comfortable, too disconnected, too far removed to notice when my head got circled in a spreadsheet during her efficiency review. What she didn't understand was that quiet people don't miss details. We memorized them. So I pulled out the binder. Not the one in the community center, the one from home. The one with the hand-tabbed clauses and notarized amendments. The one I'd updated every year since 2012. Clause 18B. No termination of founding voting holders without unanimous board approval. Due process required. Any breach? Trigger for emergency review. Written. Filed. Board approved. Margaret hadn't even looked at the original CC and RS. Hell, I doubt she even knew where the master file was stored. That memo was a footnote in her ego parade, something she thought legal would quietly rubber stamp. She hadn't considered the weight of what she'd just set in motion. But I had. I knew the covenants like I knew the floor plan of my own house. I remembered which attorney had insisted on 18B. I remembered who pushed back. I remembered how I slipped in the subclause during the equity restructure to protect the silent founders, myself included, from exactly this kind of executive power grab. She wanted a fast cut. I had built a lockbox. I didn't respond to the memo, not immediately. Let hang there. Let her think I'd gone quietly, that her PowerPoint had worked. Meanwhile, I pulled every proxy certificate I had, cross-checked the ledgers, called my accountant, made sure my 87.3%, yes, 0.3, was fully documented, time-stamped, and stamped. She was too busy booking keynote slots at the regional HOA conference and hiring brand consultants to notice the ground shifting under her sensible flats. I waited. I waited while her team pushed the new Modern Harmony initiative into the resident newsletter. I waited while she turned my department into a bullet point under pending automation. I waited while the legal cracks began to show and the board started drafting offboarding scripts they didn't understand were about to be illegal because Margaret thought she had all the power. But what she had was a match and I had a fuse. Tuesday morning, 8:14 a.m. Sharp. Margaret didn't believe in being late, only in being early enough to catch people off balance. Her assistant knocked once on the community center door, didn't wait for a response, and motioned me down the hall like I was being summoned to the principal's office. I already knew what this was. The air had been weird all week. Board members avoiding eye contact, 2 meetings mysteriously rescheduled, an access badge glitch that was being looked into. I didn't panic. I packed my binder, the one with the good pen and the clause index. Margaret didn't even look up when I walked in, just pointed at the chair across from her like she was too busy running an empire to waste time making eye contact with a woman who built half of it. Her tablet was open, probably Slack, maybe a talking point she'd rehearse in the mirror later for her HOA president podcast about decisive leadership. She cleared her throat. Your role is being eliminated effective immediately. Then, as if reading from a cue card, she continued, the enforcement officer will escort you out once you've signed the separation agreement. That was it. No small talk, no fake sympathy, not even a thank you for your years of service corporate pat on the back. Just a thin rehearsed voice and a packet of papers slid across the table with all the warmth of a parking ticket. For pages, boilerplate, fines, non-compete on community events, confidentiality, the works. I glanced at the numbers. They were almost insulting. $2, $500 for aesthetic violations on my mailbox color that had been the same since 2012. Then I looked at the last clause, which was the real tell. It implied mutual consent. It was written as though I had agreed to this. I smiled. She finally looked up then, not because of the smile, because I'd taken out my own pen. I signed deliberately, every stroke clear and clean. Then I capped the pen, placed it on top of the folder, and said softly, let's do this the right way. She blinked once like something didn't compute. The script hadn't accounted for poise. She expected tears. Maybe a raised voice. Not calm. Not that sentence. Definitely not that smile. I stood up. The enforcement officer was already outside the door. 2 rent-a-cop types in ill-fitting navy polos trying to look neutral. One of them shifted like he was nervous I'd try to make a scene. I just nodded at both of them, said, gentlemen, and walked ahead without hesitation. I wasn't escorted. I led them. Back in the community room, someone had already boxed at my desk. Not everything, just enough for a photo op. I saw the framed picture of my dog peeking out of the top. Nice touch. The PR team would play well if they needed to spin this as a downsizing story later. I carried the box myself, past the bulletin board where someone had laughed a little too hard at the new no political flags rule, past the interns, the new volunteers, whispering like middle schoolers during a fire drill, past Margaret's assistant who flinched when I made eye contact. No one stopped me. No one thanked me. That was fine. They didn't know what I still owned. Didn't know that the security badge in my pocket didn't mean access. It meant origin. My fingerprints were in every compliance document, every clause that protected this house of cards from county collapse. They'd spent so long looking up to the new president with the charm and the jargon. They forgot who laid the foundation. As I walked out the main doors, the receptionist gave me a polite, confused smile. She didn't know what had happened yet. I smiled back. Out on the street, the wind picked up, crisp clean. I stood there for a moment with the box in my arms and the sunlight on my face and thought, they just terminated 87.3% of their own homeowners association without reading the fine print. I didn't go home that afternoon. Didn't cry in my car or call a friend to vent. I booked a private booth at the old co-op workspace I helped fund back in 2011, logged in, and opened a blank email. The air smelled like espresso and eucalyptus. A barista I use in Minter offered me a free drink. I declined. I didn't need caffeine. I needed focus. Subject line, voting ledger update. That was it. Plain. Sterile. But the file attached was anything but. Inside that document lived 12 years of precision. Every rollover, every silent proxy conversion, every Class B restructuring, line by line, vote by vote. The final tally, 87.3% ownership, undisputed and fully vested. Most of it had come quietly in 2012 when the founding trio needed cash, and I offered a buy-in structured through deferred board compensation. They didn't blink back then, too focused on scaling. They signed. I notarized. Legal filed it away in a folder labeled Silent Vesting Internal. It stayed there for almost a decade, untouched, unquestioned, but not forgotten. Not by me. The file was 47 pages long with signatures, amendments, time-stamped audits. The kind of documentation you don't compile overnight. The kind of documentation that only a fool would overlook before trying to eliminate you. And Margaret was that kind of fool. I sent it to 3 people. The board chair, our retained legal counsel, and the internal governance liaison who once told me I was the only reason we slept during county audits. The email body was short. Please find and close the voting breakdown per updated ledger. All records validated, documented, and filed per Class B revision clauses under 2012 charter. That was it. No venom, no warning, just the facts. I clicked send and leaned back, watching the neighborhood through the tall glass windows. 10 minutes later, a reply popped up from the board chair. 6 words. You're still the majority. Understood. No corporate hedging, just confirmation. A quiet acknowledgement from someone who knew that Clause 18B wasn't just real, it was active. Margaret's signature on my termination agreement didn't just terminate my role. It breached governance protocol, which meant I wasn't just let go. I was wrongfully removed by a president who no longer had the board's confidence. The implications were immediate. Without unanimous approval, my termination was null. Any executive actions taken under the assumption of my removal legally fragile. And the kicker, as majority voting holder, I now had standing to call a special session, to demand a vote, to revoke privileges. The silence that followed the board chair's reply was almost beautiful. I imagined Margaret pacing in her perfectly staged living room, proud of her decisive leadership, still unaware that the woman she kicked out owned more than just a title. She owned the covenants. She owned the board's conscience. She owned the roof over her smug little head, and it was about to cave in. But she would. Very soon. By Wednesday morning, the walls at Serenity Pines were sweating. I hadn't even called a meeting yet, hadn't raised my voice or touched a single legal threat. All I'd done was send one document, and Margaret's executive suite, her kitchen command center, lit up like someone pulled a fire alarm during the annual block party. I heard from a former board member in legal that Margaret thought it was a joke. No one just holds 87%, she'd said, pacing in front of her marble island like an actress waiting for a rewrite. But the documents weren't a bluff, and legal knew it. By noon, they were elbows deep in Covenant archives, pulling dusty PDFs from off-site storage, digging through voting tables that hadn't been updated since Obama was president. Margaret's assistant sent an emergency request to our corporate counsel for any and all Class B voting conversion documentation pertaining to my name. It came back with a 16 megabytes file labeled Founding Vestment, executed 2012 to 2021. It wasn't just real, it was bulletproof. One line buried on page 28 of the founding covenant charter had them in a tailspin. No majority voting stakeholder may be terminated, transitioned, or reassigned without unanimous board consent, verified by documented vote, and certified by legal counsel. Margaret hadn't done that. Margaret hadn't even known to do that. And now every move she'd made since handing me that termination folder was under review. Not by the neighborhood watch, but by governance. Real governance. The kind that doesn't care about pastel color schemes or buzzwords, only signatures and procedural chains. She tried calling the chair, got voicemail. She tried spinning it to the newsletter Legacy Transition Strategy, but they pushed back hard. Not with this clause hanging over it. Someone had emailed. You're looking at a governance breach? Margaret, this isn't optics. This is litigation. At 2:43 p.m., a formal review request was filed by the board's compliance subcommittee. I wasn't copied, but I was forwarded the memo by a friend on the inside. Subject: Review of President action concerning majority voting holder termination. Compliance breach assessment. Margaret stopped smiling after that. Legal escalated. Risk management flagged the incident. The insurance team began evaluating exposure. Every one of her calendar entries was being pulled for context. Every document she signed that week was under a microscope. The clean removal had become a procedural nightmare, and worse, it was self-inflicted. If she had just read the covenants, if she had just asked legal before she moved, if she had just looked up that day instead of dismissing me like I was an expired access badge. But she didn't, because Margaret never planned for things she couldn't see. And I had always made sure I stayed just out of view until it mattered. The funny part, they'd always joked I was too meticulous, that I read too many clauses, kept too many backup copies, archived things like a paranoid librarian. Well, that paranoid librarian had just kicked open the compliance vault and turned the HOA president into a walking liability, all without raising her voice. Friday morning, 7:58 a.m. My inbox pinged with a meeting invite from Margaret Harlan. Subject: Leadership Realignment Post-Departure Transition. Attendees: Senior Ops, HR, Volunteer Coordinators, Comms Legal. Location: 14th floor, the Community Center Executive Boardroom. Time: 9 a.m. No CC to the board, no authorization from governance. Just a rogue calendar block wrapped in corporate speak and delusion. I stared at it for a beat, like I just caught someone picking the lock on my front door and asking for Wi-Fi. The agenda read like a script for a redistribution of compliance portfolios, legacy responsibilities, reassignment, communication rollout. One line stood out like a splinter under a magnifying glass. Transition finalization of my name's projects to designated leadership stakeholders. She was already moving my accounts, already telling departments to ignore the ownership charts, already pretending the storm wasn't real, as if the covenants were just polite suggestions and the board couldn't hear the thunder building around her feet. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my email to legal. Subject line, Clause 22C, Governance Breach. Attached a copy of the invite annotated, highlighted. Below it, I typed just 6 words. Unauthorized governance in progress. Please advise. Clause 22C, buried on page 34 of the corporate charter, was one of those legacy provisions people always forgot existed. It granted immediate board oversight and internal audit review if any executive attempted to reassign duties or access resources belonging to a majority stakeholder without signed, timestamped consent. Margaret had now done exactly that twice. Legal's response came in under 15 minutes. One sentence, no greeting, escalating to governance and risk immediately. Do not attend. I wasn't planning to. I wanted her to proceed. Every move she made now, every email, every deck, every meeting held without quorum was another nail in her compliance coffin. I didn't need to stop her. I needed her to keep digging. And dig she did. By 9:03 a.m., the glass walls on the community center second floor were fogged with tension. When my old team lead messaged me discreetly after the meeting, she acted like you were gone. Full handoff instructions. No mention of voting power. Of course there wasn't. Margaret couldn't admit what she didn't understand. Couldn't bring herself to say, I terminated the owner. Instead, she kept pushing forward like momentum could save her from inertia. But the deeper she leaned into this fantasy, the more reality pressed back. Legal wasn't just watching anymore. They were logging. Governance had pulled transcripts of the termination meeting. My name was now under protected stakeholder status in the compliance registry. Margaret didn't know it, but every step she took past that line made it easier for the board to do what needed to be done next. Because this wasn't just negligence anymore. It was misconduct. And I wasn't just the victim. I was the witness. The one with records. The one who'd never raised her voice, but always documented every word. She thought she was wrapping up a chapter. I was just turning the page. Monday morning, 6:41 a.m. I submitted the proxy request. No warning, no theatrics, just a digital form routed through our board governance portal with one line in the purpose field. Special session, violation of Charter Clause 18B and 22C. Attendance marked mandatory. Subject, review of executive overreach and unauthorized removal of majority voting stakeholder requested by Laura Bennett. Shareholding 87.3% verified. Notarized, recorded. That one entry flipped everything. Within 90 minutes, board ops confirmed receipt and activated the emergency protocol. Proxy override initiated. Special session scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. in the executive chamber. No president veto possible, no volunteer filter, no PR spin, just the facts, the chair, and the governing documents Margaret never bothered to read. By 10:12 a.m., Margaret's assistant emailed back, due to scheduling conflicts and mess. Harlan proposes shifting the board session to the following Tuesday. Please advise if this adjustment works for all parties. I didn't respond immediately. I waited. Waited until Margaret was likely mid-meeting, probably explaining away Q2 landscaping delays or hyping up her modernization initiatives. Then I replied with one sentence. Check the ownership table. That was it. No exclamation point, no legal jargon, just a quiet reminder of who actually held the keys to the room. Because in all of Margaret's ambition and glossy leadership decks, she'd skipped one essential truth. The president may drive the bus, but I own the road. The moment the board session was scheduled, it triggered other mechanisms. Compliance alerts, risk assessment flags, a governance dashboard status switch from stable to under review. Stakeholders started checking in. A partner from the landscaping contractor emailed the chair asking if operational clarity would be restored soon. One of our institutional investors, yes, even HOAs have them, flagged the board calendar with a red exclamation. Meanwhile, Margaret tried to save face. She called an emergency vision sync with the suite. I was CC'd accidentally. She must have forgotten to scrub the invite list from old templates. I watched her outline her Serenity Pines 2.0 slide deck like a woman trying to repaint a house mid-demolition. But no amount of branding would stop what was coming. Because this wasn't about optics anymore. It was about chain of command, legal procedure, founding agreements that weren't just ceremonial. They were binding. And every time Margaret tried to maneuver around them, she wasn't just annoying me. She was breaking rules. I wasn't bluffing when I triggered the proxy. With 87.3% in my pocket, I didn't need a majority. I was the majority. The covenants granted me the right not only to call the meeting, but to dictate the terms, voting order, witnesses, agenda sequence. I didn't even need to raise my voice. All I had to do was log in, so I did. And quietly the foundations Margaret had strutted across began to shift beneath her. She thought she was climbing. She didn't realize the ladder belonged to someone else. Friday, 9:57 a.m. The boardroom was already half full. Quiet, formal, tense, the kind of atmosphere that usually precedes a lawsuit or a resignation. Leather chairs, frosted glass, water pitchers nobody touched. A silence so sharp it could shave the veneer off Margaret's reputation. At 10:01 a.m., she walked in, suit crisp, hair camera ready. She greeted two board members like they were at a launch event. All charm and volume, completely oblivious until she saw me at the head of the table. Her smile faltered for a second, just a flicker, but it was there. The moment realization punched through the bubble of ego she'd been floating in all week. Her stride slowed. She looked at the chair, then back to me, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. The board chair didn't waste time. Let's address the unauthorized separation of our majority voting stakeholder, she said, folding her hands like she was opening court. Margaret, to her credit, tried to recover. We followed protocol, she said. Per guidance, the role was deemed non-essential in the upcoming restructuring plan. I slid the binder across the table, firm, centered, open to a tab labeled violations. Inside was everything. Clause 18B fully highlighted. Clause 22C annotated with legal footnotes. Proxy certificates with ink so dark you could feel the weight of every signature. A notarized log of every silent conversion, meeting invites, proxy filings, even a printout of her post-departure transition strategy agenda from the unauthorized huddle. The room was dead, quiet except for the turning of pages. Margaret stopped speaking. She stared at the binder like it might bite her. I was told, she began, but the words died because she couldn't finish the sentence without admitting how little she understood about what she'd walked into. The chair turned to Governance Counsel. Are these documents verified? Stamped, indexed, confirmed, the attorney replied. Filed and on record with the registry since 2012. The chair nodded, looked around the room, and said, in light of this information and per subsection 7.3 of the President Performance Clause, I'd like to raise a motion to suspend MS. Harlan's privileges pending further review. Seconded. Thirded. No one objected. Even her friend on the board, the one who had always echoed her tech speak and defended her agile vision, didn't say a word. Margaret opened her mouth, closed it, then sat back slowly like someone had turned off gravity. No shouting, no fireworks, just a cold, clinical pivot of power. The predator became a footnote. And I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I simply closed the binder and said, thank you. The meeting continued without her. As protocol required, her access was disabled by the end of the day. Calendar wiped. Bio removed from the site. Keycard voided. She had entered that room thinking she was running a community. She left realizing she'd just been a temporary guest and one I never left. 2 weeks passed. Not much noise. Serenity Pines comms team stayed quiet, likely under orders not to poke the bear or stir the market with anything resembling scandal. But the county filings don't lie. I was halfway through coffee in the back booth of the local cafe when my phone buzzed. New Form 8K Serenity Pines HOA Item 5. Leadership changes. President role transition following internal compliance review regarding majority stakeholder rights. There was sterile, unemotional, just enough legal polish to cover the bruises. I scrolled down. My name appeared under advisory appointments. Full name reinstated with permanent advisory authority. Not rehired, not reinstated to former position. No, just one line that said I was still here. Just higher up. The truth was I didn't want the job back. Margaret's office. Let someone else steam the ego stains out of the chair. I had no desire to go back to all-hands meetings, to budgets dressed up as PowerPoints, to pretending strategy is anything but glorified triage. What I wanted was permanence, structure, protection from ever needing to walk back into that building and be dismissed like I didn't matter. So I drafted one more document, a trust transfer. All 87.3% of my voting equity placed into a private ownership trust, one I controlled but no longer held directly, with stipulations. The key clause, no chief executive officer, no president, may execute strategic or financial actions without quarterly compliance review and sign-off from the legacy founding council. In other words, they could replace Margaret, replace the next 5 Margarets. But every single one of them would have to pass through the same checkpoint. Me. Not publicly, not loudly, just structurally invisible to the org chart, but stamped into the covenants like a watermark. They wanted me out. Fine. I left them with a shadow, a clause that lives in every board calendar, every review cycle, every executive transition. One they can't ignore without breaking the law and breaking the community with it. Some people want credit, a name on the door, a LinkedIn title that sparkles. I didn't need that. I just needed them to remember not who I was, but whose house they were standing in. The petty fines stopped overnight. The ridiculous rules about mailbox colors and flag heights suddenly became under review. Neighbors who used to cross the street to avoid me now waved like we were old friends. Margaret's Modern Harmony banners came down faster than they went up. And every time a new president sits in that chair, they open the binder first, because they know the quiet woman in the corner lot still owns the road. The laughter that ripples through the neighborhood these days isn't nervous anymore. It's the sound of people realizing the real Karen got owned by the one who never raised her voice. And if you're still here at the end, well, you already know what to do. Hit like, subscribe, and remember, in every HOA drama, there's always someone who built the rules and someone who forgot to read them. Thanks for watching The Quiet Win.